Then the Post-Civil War Constitution, 1868, this one was, the previous one, 1776, was not ratified by voters. It was done in convention. This Constitution was ratified by voters in 1868. It maintained the Declaration of Rights, and this time it incorporated it into the document instead of two separate documents. A couple of issues. When we were being readmitted into the Union after the Civil War, it was one of the requirements was allegiance to the Union, and so we've got a couple of provisions, a provision in our Constitution that says we declare allegiance to the Union, and secession is prohibited by our state constitution at the moment. So that is still in the state constitution. Yes. Yeah, time for amendment. So, and then also Declaration of Equality. So what we have in our Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. That is in our Constitution, and the guarantee of the writ of habeas corpus, which is the right not to be thrown in jail and without having a hearing, that is in our state constitution. This constitution also prohibited slavery, and all property requirements were abolished. And it also established universal male suffrage. Yeah, sure.
I had a question about earlier in the 1776 Constitution with the property requirements. You had stated that you had to have 300 acres to vote for a senator, but it's my understanding that we didn't vote for senators until the 17th Amendment. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay, so the rest of this slide, we established a 4-month school term, which over the years that has been increased. And married women's property rights. So up until this time, in a lot of states, when a woman would be married, her property became the husband's property, and the theory was you become one, and that sort of thing. So at this time, married women gained the right to keep their property. I hear some murmurings out here. So that remains to this day. And also another aspect is the document got much longer. It grew from 8 pages to 23 pages because over time government grows. That's the natural course of things, as Thomas Jefferson said. And so this Constitution got a lot bigger because government was doing more things, and in some things it probably shouldn't be doing. So, but a lot of these things are beneficial. So, and then there were two big times when there were amendments, major amendments made. In 1876, this is the end of Reconstruction. So federal troops are on their way out of the South, and by amendment, the North Carolina Constitution banned interracial marriages and also required segregated schools. So both of these provisions are unconstitutional now. They're not in there anymore. But that was 1876, end of Reconstruction. And then in 1900, a literacy test and poll tax were designed, or were put in the Constitution. The poll tax is unconstitutional, it's not there anymore. There actually is a literacy test still in the state constitution. I don't think it would be considered constitutional, federally constitutional at this point, but technically to vote you're supposed to be able to read or write any provision of the state constitution. And I don't know that it's ever been enforced that way. Well, it is in the English language, so yes, it would have to be, yeah. So. And then finally, the current Constitution came about in 1971, ratified by voters. It was a project, basically the governor asked members of the state bar and other state politicians to meet together and form a constitution. And this basically just reorganized things and deleted some obsolete language like this segregation language and things like that. And it also added or bolstered the education clause. So this is actually sort of interesting. The federal Constitution doesn't speak about education or a right to education or anything like that. The state Constitution does, on the other hand, speak about the right to education. And that's actually been the subject of litigation in recent years, with schools wanting to get more funding, and poor schools wanting to get more funding, and things of that nature. Some of that litigation has been going on for about 20 years. And then we retain the Declaration of Rights. So that's one of the themes of consistency. And some of the language has been borrowed from 1776, and it's just survived all the way through. And yeah, sure. Well, that's a good question. The Constitutional Study Commission met, they drafted a document, the Constitution, and they drafted some amendments. And then they sent that to the legislature. The legislature voted on it to put it to a vote of the people. And then the people ratified that. And they also ratified a few other amendments, which cut down the executive branch. There were almost, I think, 300 executive agencies. They cut those down to 25. It was just got really bloated, and but yes, it was ratified by the voters in 1971. Okay, and so then there's been recent amendments since then, since 1971, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are just a few. We banned the poll tax. It was already unconstitutional. We allowed the governor to serve 2 consecutive terms. This was something that Governor Hunt in the 70s pushed for and immediately took advantage of. So that worked out well for him. Yeah. So anyway, so there's a balanced budget requirement in the Constitution, and it allows the governor, if they need to make ends meet, to basically cut department budgets and things like that if they need to. The veto power, which we talked about, 1996, that was amended. A couple of the most recent ones, banning felons from serving as sheriff. Yeah, I was going to ask, yes, convicted felon, Sheriff Hagee. Was it 2010 when he ran for the primary? So, and I was reading about him, and it said that he wouldn't be, if he had been elected, this was before the amendment, he wouldn't be able to carry the gun. Yeah. So I guess he'd be Andy Taylor. Okay, baseball bat. All right. As far as we know, that's legal. And then the recent amendment was defining marriage in the traditional sense. So, and that passed this past year. So. And then finally, a couple of things, some of the specific rights in the Constitution. One of the ones I really like is that we've incorporated some of the language from the Declaration of Independence into our Constitution. And I call this the Fruits of the Labor Clause. It basically says that you have the right to life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Their own labor. Yes, that's right. So, one of the things that we're looking at the Institute is trying to use this clause to push the law in a direction of fewer regulations, especially on occupations and things like that. Some licensing requirements that we feel are burdensome. And so, yeah, how about all? Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I think that's a great part of our state constitution, one of my favorite. Also, one of the principles of sovereignty of the people. So we talked about there's sort of dual sovereignty between the feds and the states. Well, under our state constitution, the people are considered sovereign, and you act through your legislators, theoretically in Raleigh, but the sovereignty is established in the people. That means political power is the people's. But then we have the rights to religion, speech, press, things like that. On down the list, I've got the right to keep and bear arms, That's all in the state constitution. It's very similar to the federal constitution, but I think one thing that might be important here is that even though a lot of these provisions are similar to this federal constitution, sometimes our state courts will consider these rights more protected than the feds will consider the federal constitutional rights. So the federal constitution creates a basic floor, and the government can't go below that as far as protecting our rights. But individual states can raise that bar higher if they want to, and in some cases they will. So it's important that we also have these protections in our state constitution and not just in our federal constitution. Sure.
All the right to keep and bear arms, since this is an appreciation day, let's ask this question. With the executive overreach that he's trying to implement, if a gun is purchased inside the state of North Carolina, for instance, let's say I hold an AR-15 inside the state of North Carolina, are federal laws, will the federal government be able to prevent me from purchasing if this is enacted federally? If I buy it in the state, the federal government can have it.
And now this is assuming there's a federal ban that passes in the future. I mean, there may be, I don't know how the law will be written, first of all, but it's possible that the law would try to ban that. Now, whether that's constitutional is a question. So I would have to refer back to a case that was back in the 90s when the feds banned guns in school zones. The U.S. Supreme Court struck that down, saying that this connection, this interstate commerce connection, is too tenuous, it's too extenuated to be a legitimate concern of the federal government. So if the current Supreme Court follows that precedent, then I would say they would rule it unconstitutional to try to prohibit a completely in-state transaction. And I think the AR-15 is made in just north of here, actually, in Madison. So, I mean, that's an interesting question, but... Right. You know, sometimes, yeah, that's right. You will have a supremacy issue. But I think for the feds... Right, and on down the line. Yeah.